The auction barn was falling apart. Rust crept through the hinges like rot in an old man's bones. The overhead lights flickered against wood paneling warped by rain and years of disinterest. The smell inside was a mix of damp straw, diesel fumes, and something worse, defeat. Not the kind that roared. The kind that laid down and didn't get up. At the far end of the ring, under a sputtering spotlight, she lay motionless. The mare's coat was dull chestnut, or what was left of it. Most of it had been scoured off by neglect and wire fencing. Deep scars carved across her shoulders and hindquarters like the memory of whips that had forgotten mercy. Her ribs arched like broken fingers under stretched, dry skin. One of her hooves was cracked, raw. There was blood in the hay beneath her. No name. No saddle. No paperwork. Just a sticker on her flank, number 43. She didn't lift her head. She didn't even twitch. And no one, not one man or woman in that barn, cared. They leaned back in their plastic chairs, coats dusted with horsehair and boredom, arms crossed over stomachs stuffed with cheap biscuits and cheaper judgment. A few kids poked at their phones. One man snorted and whispered, "What is that, a rescue project or firewood?" A woman in high heels and sunglasses shook her head. "You'd be better off buying a tarp and painting hooves on it." Laughter rippled down the rows like flies gathering over something dead. In the ring, number 43 didn't flinch. Not when the gavel struck the podium. Not when the auctioneer cleared his throat and said, almost sarcastically, "All right, we have here, well, we had a mare. Anyone feeling charitable today?" Nothing. Silence broken only by a chuckle from the back. "Come on, folks," the auctioneer said, voice cracking like the floorboards. "She's still got 4 legs. Mostly. Do I hear $5? 4? Anyone?" More laughter. "She looks like she's already halfway buried," someone called. "She ain't even worth the bullet to put her down," another man muttered. "Bet she'll spook herself in the mirror," came another. The auctioneer tried again, but even he sounded embarrassed now. And then, a sound that didn't belong. The screech of a chair dragging backward across the concrete. It silenced the laughter like a slap. A boy had stood up. 17, maybe. Tall but not strong looking. His jeans were dirty, one knee torn open. His jacket hung off his shoulders like it had once belonged to a man twice his size. His hair was sun-bleached, messy. His eyes were still. No one knew his name. No one had seen him enter. But now, every eye in the barn turned to him. He cleared his throat, looked at the auctioneer, then back at the mare lying half-conscious in the straw. "I'll take her," he said quietly. The room blinked. "What did you say, kid?" a man near the front asked, twisting around in his chair. "I'll take her," the boy repeated. His voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud, but it cut. The auctioneer stared. Are you serious?" The boy didn't answer. He just walked forward. The ring attendant stepped aside, bewildered. No one had touched the bidding paddle. No money had been waived. But something about the boy's walk, measured, heavy, made it feel final. "You're throwing money down a sinkhole, boy," one man called out. "She's done," another spat. "You can't fix what's already decided to die." Still, the boy walked. He climbed over the low gate and stepped into the ring. And for the first time that morning, the mare moved. Not much. Just her ear. A flicker. Then her nostrils flared. And she opened one eye. The eye was cloudy, red-rimmed. But it found him, this stranger, and didn't look away. The boy crouched down beside her, slowly. He didn't reach out. He didn't speak. He just stayed there, letting her see him, breathe him in. She blinked. Once. The auctioneer finally muttered, $5, then. Sold to the fool with the ghost horse. Chairs creaked as people shifted, shrugged, turned back to their phones. The spectacle was over. But the boy was still in the ring. And the mare hadn't looked away. She hadn't looked at anyone since she'd arrived, if she'd ever looked at anyone before. But something about the stillness in that boy had caught a thread of something inside her. Not memory. She didn't remember comfort. But something older, something simpler. The absence of fear. The boy stood slowly, brushing hay off his knees. He walked over to the payment table without a word, pulled a wad of crumpled bills from his coat, and dropped them without counting. No one noticed the way his hand shook slightly. No one noticed that he left himself with just $3. No one, except the mare. When he came back to the ring, he didn't try to pull her up. He just knelt beside her again, whispered something no one could hear. And though she didn't rise, she shifted. Ever so slightly, her head turned toward him. In the middle of that cold barn, surrounded by mockery and fluorescent light, a broken creature had made her first choice in years. She chose to see him. As the auctioneer's hammer fell and the barn's laughter faded, Noah led Lyra back through the yawning doors into a silence that felt heavier than mockery. The stall was quiet. Too quiet for something that was supposed to be alive. Dust hung in the air like old regrets. Wooden beams groaned in the cold morning silence, and the low, pulsing creak of a rusted wind vane outside was the only thing reminding the barn it still existed. She hadn't moved in 3 days. Lyra lay curled into herself, legs tucked under her fragile frame like a broken marionette someone had forgotten to pack away. Her ribs were more visible now under proper lighting, sharp arcs beneath skin that looked like it hadn't felt sunlight in months. Her eye, half closed and sunken, stared into nothing. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't drunk. She hadn't responded. Noah never tried to force her. He came at sunrise and sat just outside the stall, his back against the rough wood, knees drawn up, a paperback book resting on his thigh. He didn't look at her directly. He didn't need to. He just read. Out loud. His voice was soft, steady. Untrained, maybe, but full of something more important, stillness. As if he had nowhere else to be, and nothing else to ask from her but presence. He read stories. Simple ones. Fables about foxes and rivers. Chapters from old adventure novels with yellowed pages and scribbled corners. Sometimes he didn't read at all, just sat in silence, breathing slowly, letting her hear that his lungs worked like hers. The world didn't demand anything in those moments. And for Lyra, that was new. The first time she flinched, it wasn't because of him. It was the door. An old hinge, stiff with rust, slammed shut somewhere down the corridor when the wind caught it. Just a gust. Just a noise. But it might as well have been thunder. Lyra jerked upright, eyes wild, nostrils flaring. She hit the stall wall hard, her shoulder scraping the beam. She didn't scream, horses didn't scream, but something ripped from her chest. A sound more breath than cry. A memory clawing its way forward. Noah didn't move. He just slowly set his book down, hands flat against the floor. "Hey," he whispered. "You're okay." She didn't look at him. Her chest was rising and falling too fast, muscles locking like she expected pain. But it didn't come. The next day, it was the rope. He hadn't meant anything by it, just tried to adjust the halter while kneeling beside her, careful, respectful. But when the rope brushed her cheek, she exploded. Her entire body surged upward, back legs kicking, front hooves scraping violently against the stall door. It wasn't strength, it was terror. Raw and wild and full of memories no one had earned the right to see. Noah stumbled back, palms scraped, heart pounding. But he didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't leave. He sat on the floor, a few feet from her stall, breathing hard, trying not to shake. And when she finally settled, he picked up his book again. That night, he didn't read. He just sat, in silence, letting her know he was still there. Flash. A memory, hers. The crack of reins. The stench of sweat and rust. Wheels digging into rutted dirt. A voice angry, hoarse. Pull, you worthless thing. Pain. So much pain in her shoulders, her chest. A wagon too heavy, a whip too fast. She had fallen once, hooves skidding on wet stone, and no one had helped. They had kicked her ribs. Called her names like she could understand. Maybe she had. And when she didn't get back up fast enough, they left her. In a ditch. Bleeding. Breathing. But forgotten. The sound of those boots walking away still echoed sometimes, even now, even here. Back in the stall, Lyra didn't close her eyes that night. But she didn't shake either. She simply watched the boy, sitting under a flickering lamp, his back against the wall, head tilted, half asleep. He looked tired. Not weak. Spent, like someone who had carried more than they were built for. She didn't know why he was there. She didn't know what he wanted. But he hadn't tried to ride her. Or move her. Or grab her face and make her look at him. That meant something. Day 4. She still hadn't eaten. But she lifted her head when he walked in. Just a little. Just enough to see the dust cloud shift behind his boots. Noah noticed. He didn't say a word. Just sat down, slower than usual. Cracked open the book. Read one sentence. Then another. Lyra's ears twitched. And for the first time, she shifted her weight, ever so slightly, like her body was beginning to remember how to live. Noah kept reading. The sun hadn't yet crested the ridge when Noah left the barn. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just climbed into the truck, hands still smelling faintly of hay and iodine, and headed east, down an old gravel road lined with cottonwoods and rusted barbed wire. He drove in silence, the way people do when they're not sure if they want to find what they're looking for. The place wasn't hard to find. It wasn't on a map, but the road told the story well enough. Fence posts leaned like tired old men. The fields beyond were bare, not harvested, not fallow, just forgotten. At the end of a long, crooked path, a battered gate hung loose on one hinge. Beyond it stood a sagging house with sun-bleached siding, a porch littered with cans, rope, and a single cracked boot. A red diesel barrel leaned like it was about to give up. Noah pulled up and turned the engine off. The stillness was immediate. A wind blew through the empty corral to the right. A water trough lay overturned, dry. Tether lines fluttered from old hitch posts like frayed ghosts. Noah stepped out. Before he could knock, the screen door creaked open. A man stepped out barefoot onto the porch. Mid-60s. Wiry. Worn. Skin like parchment left in the sun too long. His eyes were sharp, but they didn't shine. The kind of man who knew horses, not because he loved them, but because he'd outlasted them. He looked Noah over once, then spat to the side. "You lost, kid?" Noah didn't flinch. "I'm looking for Denton Rives." The man didn't answer, just scratched the back of his neck and stepped fully into the light. "That's me." There was no invitation to sit. No offer of water. Just silence, heavy and unimpressed. Noah hesitated a beat, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out the photo, grainy, black and white, printed from the auction listing. Number 43. Lyra, half-shadowed, ribs like knives, eyes nearly closed. He held it up. She came from here, didn't she? Denton's lip twitched. What's it to you? Noah said nothing. The man chuckled, a dry, bitter sound like wood breaking. That mare? Hell, you actually bought her? Noah nodded once. Denton scratched his jaw. She's not broken, you know. She's just lazy. Wouldn't pull when we needed her to. We fed her, sure, but a stubborn animal's like a stubborn kid. You stop feeding it for a few days, and it usually listens. He shrugged. That one didn't. The words fell like pebbles into a well. Casual. Indifferent. As if he were commenting on a busted fence post or a leaky bucket. Noah's jaw tightened. In his left hand, he held a small fistful of grass. He'd grabbed it unconsciously earlier, out behind the truck, while walking past the empty corral. Now his fingers clenched it tighter. The stems crushed in his palm, bleeding green. He didn't speak. Didn't argue. Didn't yell. He just stood there. The silence stretched. Denton didn't feel it. He was already losing interest, already half turning back toward his door like a man who'd answered what needed answering. But before he stepped inside, he tossed one final thought over his shoulder. She ain't your problem anymore. Don't waste too much feed on her. The door creaked. Slammed. Noah stood on that porch alone for a long minute. The crushed grass in his fist now stained his skin. He didn't shake. Didn't cry. But something had settled inside him, not hate, not even anger. Certainty. He looked back at the empty pasture, where horses had once pulled, bled, obeyed. Where Lyra had been worked until she collapsed, and then tossed aside like rusted machinery. He looked at that forgotten corral. And made a decision. No one would ever get to define her again. Not by weight. Not by obedience. Not by usefulness. Not by men like that. He dropped the crushed grass to the ground. Stepped off the porch. And drove back, not with questions, but with resolve. The road back felt longer than before. Even with the windows down, even with the late light brushing the tops of the fields in gold, there was a weight sitting in Noah's chest that the wind couldn't shake loose. He didn't replay Denton's words. He didn't need to. They weren't the kind you argued with. They weren't said to invite conversation. They were dropped like nails in the dirt and left there to rust. But one line stuck harder than the rest. Don't waste too much feed on her. Like she was a miscalculation. A burden. A mistake to forget before winter came. He pulled into the gravel drive just past sundown. The sky was burning down into slate and lavender. Crickets hummed somewhere in the brush. And the barn lights, those old, flickering bulbs, had started to glow. Noah didn't go inside right away. He sat in the truck for a while, engine off, forehead pressed against the steering wheel. His hands were still stained with the green from the grass he'd crushed at Denton's place. It had dried into thin lines along the creases of his fingers. Like something that had tried to root, but didn't. When he finally stepped out, he didn't bother with his boots. He padded across the dirt barefoot, quiet, careful not to disturb whatever silence might have settled inside. He didn't expect change. The barn door creaked open. Inside, everything was as he left it. The same stillness. The same scent of hay and rust and sleep. Lyra was lying down again, curled in her usual place, her head angled slightly toward the wall, eyes half closed but watchful. Not quite asleep. Not quite alert. Suspended somewhere in that middle space where prey animals lived, just aware enough to run, just tired enough not to. Noah exhaled slowly and laid his bedroll just outside her stall like always. He didn't read that night. Didn't say anything. He just slid under the blanket, arms folded beneath his head, eyes staring at the wooden beams overhead. The barn creaked once. The wind made a sound like a whisper no one meant to hear. And then stillness again. Noah drifted off. She watched him. Not like prey watching predator. Not anymore. Not like a creature expecting a command, or punishment, or a rope around her face. She watched the shape of him in sleep. The rise and fall of his chest. The slackness in his mouth. The way one of his feet twitched every now and then like he was dreaming of running, or falling, or flying. She took a step. Not loud. Not soft either. But sure. She crossed the short space to the edge of her stall, right to the wooden slats where he always sat with his book, where his voice had read rivers and forests and foxes into the air without ever asking anything in return. She didn't call. Didn't nudge. Didn't breathe too close. She just stood there. Watching. And something in the quiet of that moment shifted. The way heat lifts from the road on the first spring day. The way a wound stops stinging and starts to scar. The way you don't realize you're choosing to trust until you already have. He stirred in his sleep. Shifted slightly. Rolled over onto his side. Now his face was toward her. His hand, still half closed in the curl of a dream, lay open beside him on the blanket, palm up, fingers relaxed. Lyra lowered her head. Not much. Just enough to smell him. Then she pulled back and returned to the far corner of the stall, her hoof silent on the straw, the way a leaf falls, not rushed, not loud, just inevitable. By the time the first light broke through the cracks in the barn slats, Noah was already waking. He sat up slowly, stretching the soreness from his back. His fingers brushed against the blanket. They were damp. He looked down and saw faint prints in the dust, hoof-shaped, clear as the morning. He turned toward the stall. Lyra was already awake, standing. But something was different. She wasn't watching the door. She was watching him. And as he stood, rubbing sleep from his eyes and yawning softly, she took a step closer. No rush. No panic. Just presence. Noah didn't move. He let her come. She paused about a foot away from the stall wall. Lowered her head. Inhaled. And for the first time, she reached out, her soft muzzle brushing the back of his hand where it rested on the railing. It was brief. But real. And it was enough. Noah didn't speak. He didn't even breathe for a moment. He just closed his eyes and let it happen. That morning, the sun spilled over the barn roof like honey. Birdsong echoed faint and far. And between one broken boy and one bruised soul, trust had begun to stir. The air smelled different that morning. Sweeter, maybe. Or cleaner. Like something old had finally left the barn during the night and taken its dust and sorrow with it. Noah didn't say anything when he entered. He didn't have to. Lyra was already standing at the stall gate when he opened the door. Not pacing. Not restless. Just there. Waiting, not like she expected something, but like she was willing to see what would happen next. And that was new. He moved slow. Always slow. The halter hung loose in his hands, not swinging, not tense. The rope wasn't coiled, just draped, soft as cloth. When he reached her stall, he didn't reach over immediately. He stood still for a moment, giving her the choice. She didn't flinch. Didn't back up. So he opened the latch. Quietly. The creak echoed louder than it should have in the morning calm. Somewhere outside, a bird called once, then went silent. Noah took one breath and stepped inside. She didn't bolt. She didn't tremble. but her eyes followed every inch of him, neck stiff, ears flicked back, knees locked as if her body hadn't yet decided if it believed her mind. He knelt beside her, slowly raised the halter, paused, waited. She watched. Her nostrils flared. Her body tensed, just slightly. That memory of leather and pain flickered across her shoulders like a shadow passing beneath her skin. But then, she didn't move. He slid it gently over her head. Clipped the buckle. One breath. Then two. And she let him. They walked to the barn doors together. Step by step. No pressure. No pull. Just presence. Noah didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear her behind him. Hear the shift of hooves on straw. Hear her breath rise, quicken, slow again. When he reached the doors, he pushed one open. Sunlight spilled through like water breaking a dam. Lyra froze. Her ears went flat. Her legs stiffened. Beyond that doorway was too much, too bright, too open. Too full of things she didn't know anymore. Wind. Birds. Color. Freedom. The kind that once came with chains. Noah turned, careful not to block her path. He stepped outside. Stood on the gravel threshold, just beyond the shadows. And waited. She stood inside the barn. 1 foot ahead of the other. But not moving. Breath loud. Controlled. Her eyes locked on the opening like it was a trap. Like stepping into that light meant choosing again to belong to the world. And she didn't know if it was worth the risk. A minute passed. Then another. He didn't speak. Didn't pull. Didn't plead. He just waited. Still. And then she stepped forward. 1 hoof. Just one. It landed on the edge of the barn's shadow, touching sunlight. She stopped. Her eyes flicked upward, chest heaving once. Nothing happened. No snap of rope. No sting of rain. No weight thrown across her back. Just air. Just Noah. Watching. She took another breath. And moved again. 1 more step. Then another. She was outside now. Fully. The grass crunched beneath her hooves. The wind touched her mane and pulled it gently toward the hills. The sky, so impossibly wide, reflected in her eyes, and for a second, she looked like she didn't know whether to run or collapse. Noah didn't move. She turned her head toward him. And he stepped aside. She looked forward again. A vast field lay ahead, rolling, golden, dotted with thistles and the faint outline of trees far beyond the fence. It didn't demand anything. It didn't promise anything. It just was. An open space. A question. And for the first time in years, no one was answering it for her. She stood still. Noah could feel his heart pounding, but he didn't show it. Didn't blink. The rope in his hand was slack. Waiting, like everything else. Then, slowly, she took another step. Then stopped. Every nerve in his body was screaming, but he didn't move. Not an inch. She looked ahead. Then sideways. Then, slightly back. Just enough to see him. Their eyes met. Noah exhaled, slowly, like he was afraid even breath might break the spell. And Lyra. She took another step. 3 steps now. No words. No victory cry. But in that silence, everything shifted. The rope never tightened. She moved because she chose to. And in that moment, somewhere in the quiet of an ordinary morning, under the gaze of a boy who had nothing to offer but patience, a soul re-entered the world. The sky changed faster than they expected. One moment it was all sun-drenched stillness, Lyra grazing near the fence line, Noah stretched out on the grass nearby, arms folded under his head, eyes half shut, half listening to the wind. The next, the light turned gray. Noah sat up, eyes narrowing at the ridge. Clouds had begun to roll, slow and low, like something ancient waking from sleep. The wind shifted. The hairs on his arms stood up. He didn't waste time. "Come on, girl," he murmured. Lyra raised her head, ears flicking. She didn't bolt, but she didn't move quickly either. The smell in the air had changed. She knew storms, even if she didn't remember how. Noah clipped the rope gently, began walking her back toward the barn. The first rumble of thunder groaned far off, like a warning shot. They were halfway across the pasture when the sky split open. The wind hit first, hard, sudden, and angry. It howled through the trees and slammed into the old barn like it wanted in. The tarp roof Noah had patched 2 weeks ago flapped violently, then tore free with a scream. Rain followed, sideways, vicious, blinding. Noah flung the barn door open with one hand and guided Lyra inside with the other. She fought it at first, not from fear of him, but fear of the noise, the pressure, the return of tight spaces. He didn't yank the rope. He stepped in front of her and walked backward, toward the storm, not away from it. And she followed. Inside was chaos. The makeshift stall wall, just old panels wired together, was already leaning. A rope had come loose. Rain was dripping from the cracked roof. Lightning flashed, blinding for a second, followed by a roar that shook the ground beneath them. He got her in. Got her halted loosely to the back beam. Whispered to her. Stepped back. Then turned to fix the door. The wind had caught the top hinge. The latch was bending. If the door gave way, the whole structure might tear. He grabbed the brace pole, jammed it into place, tried to hammer it down with the heel of his palm. Another flash of light. Another crack of thunder. A sudden snap. The door slammed inward. Noah's shoulder took the first hit. He was thrown back into the corner beam. His side crunched against wood. He gasped, tried to push himself up, slipped. Pain bloomed across his ribs. Rain flooded in. The door hung half off its hinges now. The wind screamed through like a train. Straw flew. Dust. Bits of rope. The air was a storm by itself. Lyra neighed sharply, high and shrill. He couldn't see her through the rain. He tried to stand again, reached for the brace, but his legs buckled. His knees hit the ground. The barn groaned. A panel above creaked like it might tear free. That was when she panicked. Lyra reared back, the rope yanked tight, snapped. She kicked the panel beside her. Wood cracked. The stall gave way, half collapsing into itself. She turned. Ran into the storm. Noah barely saw her go. Only the shape, a streak of chestnut vanishing into gray. Then everything went black. Time passed. No one knew how long. The storm raged. The barn shuddered. And outside, in the dark and the fury, something unseen was moving. Hooves. Rain. Thunder. And something else. Ivy arrived just after midnight. She hadn't planned to come. She was just doing her usual post-storm rounds, checking fences, driving the perimeter. But when she saw the barn, her chest tightened. The door was hanging. The yard was flooded. And the truck, Noah's truck, was still parked in the mud. She jumped out. Ran. Called his name. No answer. She pushed the door fully open, stepping over debris, hay, broken boards. Then she saw him. Crumbled near the back beam, half covered in loose straw, blood on his shirt, not moving. She rushed to him. Kneeling. Fingers at his neck. A pulse. Faint, but there. Her hand moved to her pocket, ready to call for help. And then she froze. There was movement in the storm. Not trees. Not wind. Hooves. And through the blackness, soaked and trembling, Lyra appeared. Chest heaving. Eyes wide. She stood at the edge of the barn, rain pouring off her like she had been pulled from the sea. Ivy didn't move. She just stared. The mare stepped forward. Not frantic. Not lost. Focused. She crossed the threshold. Past the torn rope. Past the broken stall. Past the barn door she had once feared. Straight toward the boy. She stopped beside him. Lowered her head. And nudged his hand once, twice. Then stood still. Watching him. Protecting him. Choosing him. Ivy reached slowly for her phone. Hit record. Her voice barely above a whisper. That horse, she just came back for him. No one spoke. Not her. Not Noah. Not Lyra. But the message was clear. Under the shatter of thunder and ruin, the one who had been abandoned had returned. Not because she owed. Not because she feared. But because, for the first time in her life, she had chosen. The barn smelled like rain and antiseptic. Sunlight pushed weakly through the shattered slats in the roof, catching the motes of dust still dancing in the aftermath. Ivy moved with silent efficiency, her boots crunching softly on the straw as she unpacked her kit. Noah sat on a stool nearby, left arm in a sling, bruises blooming dark along his ribs, but his eyes never left Lyra. She stood in the center of the barn, unhaltered. Still soaked from the storm, her coat steamed faintly where the morning light touched it. She wasn't tied. She didn't try to run. She didn't need to. Ivy approached her with the careful grace of someone who'd been around animals long enough to know how not to ask for permission with words. She let Lyra see her. Smell her gloves. Then gently, she ran her hands along the mare's side. No resistance. But a flinch, sharp and involuntary, when Ivy's fingers traced the ribs just behind her left shoulder. She's got an old fracture here, Ivy murmured. Never set properly. Probably happened months ago. Maybe longer. She crouched down, inspecting her front leg, then moved toward the hip. And here, left hocks out of alignment. Just a little. Probably from being hit or overworked on rough ground. Her voice was clinical, but her hands were gentle. Lyra didn't shy away. She just stood. Still. Noah leaned forward. Can you fix it? Ivy stood, brushed hay from her knees. With time, she said. The bones have healed the way all neglected things do, wrong, but determined. We'll need to do some slow work. Gentle stretching. Heat therapy. She'll never race. But she'll live. She'll walk. She'll be okay. Then her eyes moved to Lyra's face. And her tone changed. But this, she gestured gently toward the mare's eyes, this takes longer. Lyra's eyes were clearer now. Not bright, not yet. But less clouded. Less collapsed inward. Still, they flicked at every small sound, the creak of wood, the snap of a glove, the rustle of paper. Her ears stayed half-turned, as if always waiting for a voice to rise, a boot to drop, something to go wrong. That kind of fear, Ivy said quietly, doesn't sit in the muscles. It lives in the blood. In memory. She turned to Noah, her voice softening. You'll need more than patience. Noah looked back at Lyra, then slowly stood. Walked toward her, carefully, not hiding the limp in his stride. He reached out, and this time, she met his hand halfway. His fingers touched her cheek, ran down the bridge of her nose. That's okay, he said, so softly Ivy almost didn't hear. We've got time. Time became their new currency. Not measured in minutes or miles, but in moments. The moment Lyra leaned into the brush for the first time instead of pulling away. The moment she nickered softly when Noah approached with a bowl of oats, no longer just tolerating him, but acknowledging him. The moment she lay down in the open pasture, belly exposed, legs curled, not because she was weak, but because she was safe. Each of those moments was tiny. But together, they formed the first notes of something unspoken between them. Her body began to change too. The dull, cracked texture of her coat gave way to something smoother. Reddish brown deepened into soft, burnished copper. The scars were still there, pale against her flanks, but the skin around them no longer looked dead. Her eyes began to reflect more than fear. They reflected curiosity. Some mornings, she would approach Noah before he called her. She'd bump his shoulder with her muzzle when he sat too long. Once, Ivy saw her reach out and gently pull a hoodie sleeve between her teeth like a foal nudging a sibling to play. You've got yourself a shadow, Ivy teased one afternoon. Noah smiled, brushing loose hay from Lyra's back. She's not following me, he said. She's just walking the same road. There were setbacks too. Stormy nights still made her restless. Sudden noises sent her stiffening. The farrier's rasping tools left her quivering for hours afterward. But those setbacks no longer broke the spell, they just reminded them of how fragile trust could be. One evening, Noah sat beside her in the pasture, just outside the barn. The sky was turning purple, stars not yet ready to appear. The grass was cool. His hand rested lazily against her flank as she chewed quietly beside him. He looked up at the sky. Then down at her. You know, he murmured, you don't owe me anything. She didn't respond, of course. But she moved closer. Laid her head against his shoulder, not heavy, just enough to let him feel her breath through the fabric of his jacket. He closed his eyes. Smiled. Yeah, he whispered. Didn't think so. That night, Ivy walked past the barn, flashlight in hand, her truck cooling beside the fence. She saw them through the slats, boy and horse, side by side, unmoving under the white sky. She stopped for a moment. Watched. Didn't say a word. Then turned off the flashlight. Let them have the dark. Because there, under the stars, and the silence between two battered souls, one had grown wings, and the other had learned how to wait. Late October air carried a different kind of silence. Not the heavy, stagnant stillness of sorrow, but the kind that came with decision. The kind that wrapped itself around the body like a second skin and whispered, "You're strong enough now." Lyra's coat had deepened into something richer, almost bronze in the right light. Her mane, once tangled and streaked with dust, now curled lightly along her neck, catching sunlight like it belonged in motion. But it wasn't her body that had changed the most. It was the way she stood. Taller. Straighter. Less like she was bracing for something, and more like she had already survived it. Noah stood beside her at the edge of the trailer ramp, one hand on the lead rope, the other holding nothing at all. Behind them, the barn faded into the tree line. Ahead, stretched the road. He looked at her, not as owner, not even as partner. Just as someone asking, "Are you ready?" He didn't need a nod. He didn't need a sign. She stepped onto the ramp. The road was familiar in the way that old wounds sometimes are. Not sharp anymore, but still tender when pressed. They passed the turnoff where the fence had fallen. The billboard for the feed store, peeling paint clinging to its last season. The rusted tractor half buried in overgrowth. And then, the gravel. That stretch of road where tires crackled like dry bone. Where memories walked beside them like ghosts. Noah turned down the lane that led to the auction yard. He hadn't been back since that day. The building looked smaller now. Not in size, but in power. The old tin roof sagged a little lower, the paint had chipped more. The same boards groaned underfoot. But the weight of it, the fear of it, had diminished. Noah parked near the fence. Killed the engine. Silence fell again, broken only by the sound of a distant crow and the faint rhythm of Lyra's breathing. He didn't speak. Didn't reach for her. He stepped out, walked to the other side, and opened the trailer gate. Lyra stood inside. Still. Looking. And for a moment, her ears flicked flat. Her shoulders tensed. That memory of cold metal under her hooves, of laughter cutting sharper than any whip, of eyes that didn't see her as alive, washed back over her like a flood. But this time, there was no rope forcing her forward. No voice yelling commands. No slap of fear waiting if she froze. There was just Noah. And an open gate. She stepped down. Hesitated. Her hooves touched gravel. The same gravel she had once bled on. She looked toward the barn. Its doors stood closed, shadows slanting across the entryway. No crowd inside today. No auctioneer's voice. No laughter. But still, her body remembered. Her chest rose quicker. Eyes wide. Legs twitching as if ready to turn, to bolt. Noah let go of the rope. Didn't drop it in frustration. Didn't throw it in surrender. Just opened his fingers and let it fall. It landed softly against the ground. He took one step back. And waited. She didn't run. Not forward. Not away. She simply stood there, tail flicking once. She looked at the building again. Longer this time. She took one step toward it. Then stopped. Her ears turned forward, then back. Another step. Then she turned her head. And walked the other direction. Not fast. Not afraid. Not retreating. Just walking. Calm. Certain. Toward the open field behind the auction yard, where the grass had begun to regrow between patches of forgotten fencing. She walked without lead. Without fear. Without demand. And as she passed the barn, close enough to see the cracked wood, the dusty gate where she'd once been paraded like refuse, she didn't flinch. She didn't stop. She chose. Noah stood still. Didn't call. Didn't follow. He watched her silhouette move further from the building. Watched her stop near the crest of a small rise. She turned, facing the barn. And then, facing him. Their eyes met, even from the distance. And Noah, he smiled. Because that was what victory looked like. Not applause. Not fireworks. Not some dramatic gallop across the skyline. Just a soul, finally allowed to walk away from the place where the world tried to define her. Not in shame. Not in anger. But in sovereignty. He walked to where she stood. No rope. No reins. When he reached her, she didn't step back. She leaned her shoulder, just barely, into his. He placed his hand there. And the two of them stood like that as the wind carried the last breath of memory away from that place. Behind them, the auction yard sat still. Unchanged. But this time, it didn't matter. Because she had changed. And that was enough. The fall festival in town wasn't grand. It never was. Just a few white tents along Main Street, handmade signs, hay bales stacked in corners, children laughing too loud near pumpkin stands. It smelled like cider, old wood, and fried dough. Noah had brought Lyra not to show her off, but to let her see. She stood quietly at the edge of the green, near the apple cart, tethered loosely to a post she could have pulled away from at any moment. Her coat glistened in the early afternoon sun, a rich, clean copper that caught eyes without asking for attention. People passed. Some glanced. Some paused. But it wasn't until Ivy's little sister, Ellie, 6 years old, wild curls and no fear, approached that something truly changed. Ellie didn't ask. She just walked right up, small boots stomping confidently across the grass, and stood in front of Lyra like they were old friends who had simply forgotten to meet. Noah noticed, but he didn't move. Lyra saw her. Ears flicked. Nostrils flared. A breath. Then stillness. And Ellie, without hesitation, reached out her tiny hand. The crowd around them stilled, just slightly. A few heads turned. Lyra didn't step back. She lowered her head. Slowly. Gently. Until Ellie's hand found the space between her eyes, right there in the hollow where most creatures carry their ghosts. She stroked her once. Twice. And Lyra stayed. No flinch. No warning. Only breath. And quiet. And presence. Ivy was nearby, frozen in place, a napkin still in her hand. Her voice, half choked, carried softly. She's never let anyone touch her there. Not even me. Noah heard it. He smiled, but didn't turn around. He just kept watching Lyra. And when Ellie stepped back and whispered a soft thank you, the mayor blinked slowly, as if to say, "You're welcome. I see you too." A moment passed. Then Noah finally spoke, softly, more to himself than to anyone around. "We don't save them," he said. "We just give them the space to save themselves." There was no applause. No music. But someone exhaled, and someone else wiped a tear from their cheek. Because everyone there that day had seen something they couldn't quite name. A life choosing to live again. A creature choosing to trust. A story choosing to end, not with rescue, but with return. Some stories don't begin with miracles. They begin with bruises, silence, and a hand that doesn't pull, but waits. And sometimes, the most powerful rescue is the one where no one begs, but someone stays. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone's still waiting to believe they're worth a second chance. Tell us in the comments. What did you feel the moment Lyra came back in the rain? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For more true stories of hope, healing, and the quiet power of connection. Only on Gallop of Glory. We'll see you in the next ride.